In this video, we'll take a tour of the Timeline panel. This panel here is a Timeline panel. Notice, in the tab, it has the name of the composition represented in this panel. This composition is also being shown right now in the Composition panel. The Composition panel shows us the visual composite of all of these layers in the Timeline panel. Usually, when you have a Timeline panel open, you're viewing the same composition in the Composition panel, although it is possible to manipulate one timeline while looking at another composition. I'll expand the timeline a little bit by dragging on its upper edge, just so that we have some more room to see. A composition consists of layers stacked on top of one another. This stack of layers in the Timeline panel and its order determines how the layers are composited together and shown in the Composition panel. The layer on bottom is composited first, and then the layers on top are composited one on top of the other. Each layer includes several properties that you can see on the Timeline panel. Let's click the triangle next to this one and look at its transform properties. I'll move the current time indicator until we can see the logo spun all the way around so that we can see its front face. And now I can manipulate the property here in the Timeline panel. I'll press Ctrl-Z to undo that change. You can also change a property by clicking the number and typing in a new value. I'll press Ctrl-Z to undo that as well. To make a layer invisible, click the eyeball switch or the visibility switch. Notice that the logo disappeared. If I click the visibility switch again, it reappears. If a layer has audio, you can click in the audio column. For example, the palette and footage layer does have audio. So if we click, it turns the audio on. Click again to turn it back off. To solo a layer, meaning to show only that layer, click in the solo column. To unsolo, meaning to show all the layers again, click again. You can solo more than one layer by clicking solo for more than one layer. But since we only have two visible layers here and an adjustment layer, there's really no point in doing that now. To prevent a layer from being selected or modified, you can lock it by clicking in this column. Now that this layer is locked, if I try to select it, it just flashes and doesn't let me do anything. Similarly, if I were to try to select it in the Composition panel, I can't. I'll unlock the layer. If I enable animation by clicking the stopwatch, a keyframe appears here, and the keyframe navigator controls appear here. If I set another keyframe at another time by dragging the current time indicator to that time and changing the position value, I can now use these arrows to go to the next and previous keyframe. If I click this button, it will add or remove a keyframe at the current time, like so. I'll go to the previous keyframe and remove it as well. The next column over is the label column. These colored squares indicate something about the layers. For example, this aqua color indicates that this is a layer based on a video footage item. If I duplicate the layer by selecting it and pressing Ctrl-D or Command-D on macOS, I now have two layers, each with aqua labels. Now, one of them is selected. I'll click its label color and choose Select Label Group. Now notice, every layer that has the same label color has been selected. If you click the column heading here that says Layer Name, it switches to Source Name, and instead of showing the name of the layer that I've given it, it shows the name of the source item, which is the name of the footage item in the project panel. If I right-click or Control-click on macOS, I can choose Reveal Layer Source and Project and see the footage item that this is based on. We're currently seeing switches in the layer panel. If you click the Toggle Switches and Modes button, it shows blending modes instead of those layer switches. Blending modes determine how each layer in the composition blends with the ones beneath it. T refers to Preserve Underlying Transparency, which means that transparency information for a layer is gotten from the layers beneath it. And the Track Map menu allows you to specify a layer above from which this layer can get its alpha information or its transparency information. I'll click Toggle Switches and Modes again to go back to seeing the layer switches. If you click the Shy button, the layer is made shy, and then you can click Hide Shy Layers, and only the layers that have their Shy switch chosen are hidden. I'll click this again to show all layers, and click this again to make the layer no longer shy. The switch is the Continuously Rasterize or Collapse Transformation switch, and the switch sets the quality for the layer between draft and full quality. You can set motion blur for a layer, you can make a layer an adjustment layer, or you can make a layer a 3D layer. Notice that our adjustment layer has effects on it, and we can choose to enable or disable effects by clicking the effects switch. Let's put the current time indicator at a place in the composition where the effects are active. Here we have the black and white effect active. If I click the effects button, the effect is deactivated. Actually, all effects on this layer are deactivated. And here we see that this is an adjustment layer. If we had any layers that were retimed, such as by having time remapping applied to them, or a frame rate conversion, then we could enable frame blending for the layers. Setting frame blending for a layer is only one step. You also have to set frame blending for the entire composition by clicking the Enables Frame Blending button. Similarly for motion blur, even if you've enabled motion blur for a layer by clicking the motion blur switch, you still have to enable motion blur for the entire composition by clicking the Enables Motion Blur for All Layers switch. I'll turn motion blur back off. If you click the Composition Mini Flowchart button, it brings up a small flowchart with which you can navigate back and forth between compositions in a composition hierarchy. We only have two compositions, one nested inside the other now, so our hierarchy is very simple. This button, the Live Update button, it's currently enabled. If Live Update is enabled, then as you are interacting with layer properties or dragging layers around, After Effects will update the image in the composition panel. But if this switch is deselected, then if you are dragging in the composition panel or manipulating properties, After Effects will wait until you're done, meaning wait until you've released the mouse before it renders the image. For example, if I move the vector graphics logo, notice the composition panel is updating as I drag. But if I turn Live Update off, I get a warning. I'll click OK. And as I drag, the image doesn't update until I let go. I'll turn Live Update back on. Many people, when they're experimenting with buttons in the timeline panel, accidentally turn this off and then get confused. We won't cover the other buttons in the timeline panel just now. Just notice that Brainstorm can be used for experimenting with properties, and the Graph Editor button will enable the Graph Editor instead of Layer Bar mode, like so. That's a whirlwind tour of the timeline panel. You'll be spending a lot of time in the timeline panel as you work with After Effects, and you'll very quickly become familiar with it.